And welcome to this recording of Battle of the Apps. We're back with another guest to talk to you about apps and solutions that can make life easier as a content creator and as a business owner. I am your host, Pascal Fenton, and today I'm joined by that British podcast guy, Mark Asquith. Mark, welcome to Battle of the Apps.
Hello, mate. Thanks for having me. Long time no speak, like, what, a week?
Well, you could even say long time no see, because last time we saw each other was a year ago, literally, physically.
Oh, man, it was. I forgot about that. It was a bowling alley, wasn't it? Yeah, I'm still bad at bowling, even a year later. Yeah, wow. It's crazy. 2020's been nuts for that. Normally, we would have seen each other a couple of times, but alas, not.
Absolutely, because one of the visits included actually me coming to visit the studio in Sheffield, so we'll have to wait a bit longer for that.
Yeah, you'll have to come down. We'll get you on the Star Wars podcast as well, mate. That's called Two Birds, One Stone. We'll do our work stuff and then we'll talk Star Wars. So we should do that when we're allowed to.
We will. So for our viewers and listeners, let me remind you that Mark Asquith, or Monsieur Mark Asquith to me, is a speaker, coach, and podcaster. Yes, sometimes he can find the time to create his own work, but he's also, importantly, the founder of Rebel Best Media. Rebel Best Media is the brand and the team behind Captivate.fm, which we're going to discover today, as well as Productivity, podcast website, and Podcast Success Academy. All fine products and solutions for the entrepreneur and business owner out there. But we're going to start, if you don't mind, Mark, with Captivate.fm. How did you come up with the idea? What was the spark? What happened to you to make you want to create this platform?
I'm just going to throw a little by the way in before I answer that. You and me have talked about it, but for the video, like for you and YouTube watching this, I'm sorry about the background. Normally I'm in a nice studio, but today we're at home because of COVID. Anyway, great question, Pascal. It was the classic, like, scratching your own itch. So you know, like, a little bit of my background. So I'm, like, very quickly former agency owner, used to run a design and digital agency. We used to make software for people. I created a DC Comics podcast called Two Shots to the Head, which for you DC fans out there is a Dark Victory reference. Still love that name. And kind of at the same time, like, those two worlds kind of started to meet. So we had the digital agency building products, building websites, web apps, and so on and so forth, and then me podcasting about comics. I kind of brought them together to do a business show back in the idea was in 2014. I launched the International Podcast Day. And kind of when I did that, I realized that there was a lot of missing pieces for podcasters. Like, you'd have to host with an old school host, like, the 2005 looking host. You would have to then try and link it all to WordPress and all this good stuff. And it was really difficult. So we created this managed web platform called Podcast Websites, which was essentially outsource your WordPress management to us if you're a podcaster building a personal brand. That did well. We partnered with John Lee Dumas on that one. It was fine. It worked really well. It's still trading to this day. But what we did was, as we went through that process, obviously we created more and more podcasts, and we got deeper into podcasting, like you said in the very kind words in the intro. We speak everywhere. We travel. This is the only year since about 2015 that I've not done like 3-4 months in the US, because we speak that much at all of these podcasting conferences, and it became apparent every time we went that podcasting was still really old school. So we created Captivate. Like, we built a hosting platform that I wanted, basically. It was Ian Anderson Gray, actually, who was the first ever user. I know you've had Ian on the show.
Right.
He was the first ever Captivate user, because he was like, look, man, I'm launching my new podcast. I want to use Captivate. When's it ready? I was like, well, I mean, if you don't tell anyone, you can kind of use it today, like this, but just here are the list of things that don't work on it. And that was back in April last year. So we to kind of put it through the lens, we've been in podcasting 6 or 7 years and built all these products. Captivate was the latest, and we built it literally because I wanted a good podcast host that was really designed from the ground up. We didn't, like a lot of people when they're like building software, they'll look around at what's going on in other software. We just didn't do that. We just built it because we built it based on what we wanted. So every piece of Captivate is like the best version of what you can get in a podcast host, because it was like, right, analytics, what can we do? Well, what do we want? What would we like to see? Let's do it like that. And we did that for every piece of Captivate. And it was Kieran and I, my co-founder, as you know, we did that pretty much by just working late nights, over the course of a year. And that's where it came from, literally scratching the own itch, classic founder story, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. But what I like about it is, I mean, I've loved to have been a fly on the wall in this conversation, because essentially you as podcasters were slightly frustrated or slightly kind of, wishing things would be a bit better. And then this conversation was flowing around the room. That would have been just, have you recorded that by any chance? Because that would be something worth listening to, in a few years' time.
Yeah, well, we toyed with the idea. We've got like this Founders Fireside podcast idea. And we wanted to go through that process, but we didn't at the time. And the reason for it was that this is quite weird. Like, as a founder, it only really feels like maybe, what are we on, 27th of October as we're recording this? Maybe only feels like 2 months ago since a lot of that stress lifted. And we were under so much stress. Like, I've gone far grayer, and far more receding on top, because we were building Captivate. So it was weird for us, man, because we were so siloed in just building and designing and developing this thing that we didn't think about anything else. Like, we literally did not. Like, I was churning my podcast out, and it was all right content, but it wasn't until I relaunched the Podcast Accelerator show last May where I can truly say, actually, it went really, it really kind of started to be great content. And that's when I adopted this British podcast guy thing, and I got the new photos done, and we got the personal brand site. And it was, so just to kind of very quickly touch on it, it was part of this 15-month repositioning that we had in the industry, because we created a website platform, which is like, that's easy. So imagine turning up at this, all these conferences, and we were, we used to do some like VaynerMedia and all these people, and you'd be in New York chatting to them, and it sounds all fancy and nice. And you'd say, what, they'd say, such and such, I'm whatever, what's your name? And I'd have to introduce myself as Mark from Podcast Websites. And instantly it was like, you build websites for podcasters. Where's the innovation in that? So it was part of this 15-month journey, like this strategic vision that we had to go from being a web supplier to being a tech company, which is why we brought Rebel-based media in. And then we split the companies out, where we've got Captivate and Podcast Websites, which is a product and productivity. And it just kind of, like, the stress and all of that mountain on top of us. So we were, I was really just not doing anything worthwhile, like recording the stuff, and it was just building all of that stuff out. And I know that's the ultimate worthwhile thing, is building the product, but all that fun peripheral stuff, I just never got to it, because I was like, gotta build. Weird, really. And I think just to that point, though, just to kind of finish that one off, I think we were very fortunate, because we'd been in podcasting for such a long time that we could kind of, I don't want to sound complacent, because that's not what we are, but we were able to ride that brand equity that we'd built. So for that year we were building Captivate, we had so many network connections. We had so many friends and relationships with people in the industry, so many customers through Podcast Websites and people that liked our content, that for that year of building, we were able to just use the kind of inertia that we'd built up, take the foot off a little bit on everything else, head down on the product, and the inertia carried us through. And then when we put the foot down again, probably like August last year, it just kind of ramped back up in terms of content and brand. And it's weird, man. It's someone told me once, this whole work-life balance thing, like you've got to give the specific things that need your attention, that attention at any given time. And sometimes it's building, sometimes it's life, sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's brand. And you've got to focus on that one thing, and everything else will be fine, because the inertia will carry you through. So that's just a bit of a digression, but I think it's fascinating to kind of think about that.
All right, then. So shall we move on to the platform itself, if you don't mind, Mark? Thanks again for the background, because I think it's always important to understand the origin of those solutions, and then it creates a nice context for you. So feel free to go into screen share mode, and then we'll follow you.
Absolutely. So I'll give you a bit of a very quick whistle stop tour of Captivate. So you're going to see my Chrome screen here, which is the Captivate dashboard. We'll use Spark or Rebellion, Pascal, because I know you're a very kind supporter. So thank you for the support on that. So this is Captivate. I mean, podcasting ultimately for an entrepreneur, for a small business, for an SME, is very much about creating content that you can use in a number of ways. Number one, I mean, you do this better than anyone I know. You create content that proves that you're the expert. or you create content that connects you to other people. And that's how we built Captivate. We wanted to build Captivate to make all of that stuff easy. So logging into Captivate, you'll see your downloads overview. You'll see how you're trending. I mean, actually, Spark Rebellion looks like it's having a good month, which is nice. You'll see there that, it's just very easy to run. You can run multiple shows. So if I click my shows, Pascal, you'll recognize some of these, the Accelerator, you'll recognize Spark, you'll recognize some of the older shows that we've got on there. So it's quite cool as a business owner or an entrepreneur, because you can spin up as many different podcasts as you want to target different types of niche or different elements. If you segment your customers out, for example, you can target. A great example is creating a top of the funnel piece of content, and then a bottom of the funnel piece of content that's like a retention piece of content, that, tutorials and tips and so on. So there's a lot of good stuff you can do there. It's just a very, very simple platform to use. Everything is very well considered. You've got your episode listings. You've got the ability to publish episodes just really, really quickly. There's not that much to explain on these kind of screens. It's just there for the busy marketer. It's there for the busy entrepreneur. We've built it because, frankly, like, I'm busy, you're busy. So it's just really easy to start to publish.
Well, that's actually a very important point, because I can tell already, compared to other platforms, forgive me, that there is that thought around, efficiencies, not cutting corners, not, missing steps, but suddenly just that one view page, for example, is already a vast improvement from other things that I've used in the past.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's been thought out like that. We've got the WordPress plugin as well. So many SMEs, many business owners, many marketers, they use WordPress for the site. So we've got the WordPress plugin that then links into your SEO, and it's just little things like that. And I'll give you a bit of a background on it. So Pascal, obviously, you listen to Spark Rebellion.
I do.
This is George Lucas coming back to fix Star Wars, which we could talk about forever. If I was to edit this, you'll have seen all of this stuff over on Twitter. You'll have seen it on Google. You'll see, this is the stuff that you just seen. It's all very, like you said, it's very efficiently thought out, little time-saving tips like your episode SEO, like your default publish times. Even things like the clickable timestamps. If I jump over to sparkerrebellion.com and show you this, the clickable timestamps, this George Lucas one here, it just all works. If you're a busy person, you don't have to mess around with shortcodes. You just type your timestamps in, and it just works. It just instantly gives you them. And we've every part of Captivate is well thought out like that, including things like, I'll give you a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the other bits as well. Things like the analytics. We know that, entrepreneurs, business owners, SMEs, marketers, they don't want to do a deep dive until they want to do a deep dive. What they actually want is that quick hit reportable information, the KPIs, which is why we've designed this with the the busy marketer in mind. That's what I'm a busy marketer. So things like your unique listeners, very instantly accessible, your trends, your downloads, your averages, things that are trending today. But then also things like, why are we getting the spikes? What did I do here that led to a spike? And even things like, for example, if I go into, if I was to just look at, let's have a look at, when did we release one? So let's have a look at, well, let's see what that spike's all about there. Saturday, 10th of October. So if I choose a custom day, I've broken it. Saturday, 10th of October, clicked the wrong one, that's why. If I choose Saturday, 10th of October, right there, what it's going to do is it's going to show me a full breakdown hour by hour of what's been going on. So I can see actually, like, where did these downloads come from? Like, what's going on with this? Why am I getting these spikes? When I published this tweet, what happened to my download? So you can start to really dig into this stuff. Some of the more fun stuff on the analytics is episode comparisons. So as an example of that, I can compare these two episodes. Look at what my marketing is doing. Add another episode, get rid of the George Lucas one, start to compare some older episodes. Wait a sec, everything that I've spoken about here.
Very nice. Yeah, I like that.
It just works so well. And then when we really get into it, season 2 trailer, we can then start to see things like performance data. the first 24 hours, the first 28 days, the total. So you can see kind of how many subscribers you've got, what people's behavior is. You can look at the number of unique listeners, where they drop off when they're listening on your web player, the number of consumed minutes, the number of replayed minutes. There's all sorts of good stuff. You can even look at things cumulatively as well. So this shows me the downloads for that episode as they happened, and I can actually start to map that cumulatively instead. So the fun thing with this is that if you're a marketer, if you're an entrepreneur, like the worst thing you can do with content is just put it out there blindly. Like we know that doesn't work. So we need to have this intelligence. A couple of other things that, you know, are quite interesting to the marketer. Collections. So let me show you very quickly on the accelerator. We've got collections where you can basically create collections of episodes that you can then embed into a website. So if I was to edit this podcast SEO 101 collection, what you would see is that it collects all of the episodes for the SEO content that we do. And I can embed that on an SEO tutorial, which we do over on the Captivate blog. So it's really, really well thought out stuff, because if you're doing wider content marketing, you want people to stay in your ecosystem a lot longer, and you can actually work with that really easy and say, well, do you know what? Here's complementary content. If you're not a reader, here's the audio stuff, you know? So like I said, it's just lots of interesting bits. The obvious stuff.
What I like about this, sorry, Mark, is this idea of there is a point for all content creators where the sheer volume of content actually can be a bit of a deterrent for your audience. And I call this, content customer service. So have you thought on their behalf how you can reorganize the existing content to essentially make it more logical to them or more accessible? So yeah, if you package all the SEO episode, which may have been recorded over the space of 6 months, into that one kind of environment, they will actually thank you for it.
Oh, but yeah, absolutely. And that's the crux of that, is that they actually come with their own RSS feed as well, those collections. So what that means is that you could subscribe to just that collection inside Apple Podcasts, for example. So it works really, really, really well. Obviously, we work with Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Player FM, Deezer, all of the Indian platforms. Like, we work with everyone, you know, when it comes to distribution. It works really well. A couple of the other things that I'll very quickly tell you about: you can have unlimited team members. So again, if you're a marketer, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an SME, get your team on there. You know, get your marketing team on there, get your editor on there, get your content marketer, your content exec on there. And they can all. Here's the kind of other thing: if you look at the website, or if you use WordPress for it as well, you can even like highlight your team. So this is Gaz, Pascal, you know, Gaz and I would do Spark of Rebellion. I can highlight Gaz on the website. It's very easy to do that. Another couple of things as well that I think are interesting to business owners and entrepreneurs, if I switch back to Spark of Rebellion for this one, if we look at the marketing section, we've got things like a single subscription link. So, you know, like ordinarily it's like, okay, go and listen to my podcast on anywhere that has got podcasts. It's a little bit weird. Like, it's a bit crap to have to do that. So we created this single subscription link where you give that to you read it out on a podcast episode, you stick it in a tweet, you put it on a business card, and it always sends them to a place where they can easily just get that data. They can just subscribe to the show. And tons more bits as well in here. We actually give you the opportunity to have calls to action inside your podcast player. So if you've got a lead magnet or whatever, if I just look at this one here, so this George Lucas episode, if I click on the links, I've actually got links, and I can use lead magnets, I can do Patreon, I can do whatever. So again, it's all just well thought out. We've got integrations. We've just got Aweber connected on this one, but this week as we're recording this, we're releasing our MailChimp integration, and we just released our Zapier integration, which will be on that screen as well. So here's an example for Spark of Rebellion. What I do is every time a Spark of Rebellion episode is published, you get a tweet which embeds the player on Twitter, so people can listen directly on Twitter, and it's just
nice.
It just works with Zapier easily. You could send your analytics to an Excel spreadsheet. You can email yourself the analytics. You can email people from here about your new show. There's so many. One of the interesting ones that we use here is when I upload when I upload an MP3 file to a Dropbox folder, create me a draft episode in Captivate. Like that is publishing, like the ultimate publishing workflow. It's brilliant. So it's little things like this that just make it a little bit easier. And then probably the last thing that I'll show you is just really around like the customization element of it, where you can just you can start to customize things like your podcast player. Works on all devices. It actually designs itself based on your color scheme in your cover art. But you have full control over this. You know, you can switch off all of these buttons, all these links. You can get rid of a lot. Just trim it right down to suit your website, to suit your needs. It's simple stuff, you know, that no one else has really thought about. And that's Captivate.
Yeah, well, thank you. Do you know, I'm so pleased, you know, that you still, because for our viewers and listeners, Mark and I agreed to speak to each other today some time ago, and that was before, obviously, your eventful house move. And you're such a trooper. You still wanted to go ahead, despite the fact that, you know, bless you, you've been busy with running the business and moving house and so on. And I'm so pleased because there was some little facets of Captivate.fm that I've missed, I must confess. So I shall be talking to my co-host, Roger Edwards, about our 2 Geeks and the Marketing Podcast series and how we can obviously make good use of this. So brilliant. Thank you so much. I can't let that British podcast guy go just yet before asking a few questions around. So we are approaching, actually, I suppose, you know, next year, quite an important milestone when it comes to content creation. And I know, looking at the stats from Ofcom that was released obviously recently, that the consumption of podcast content has gone through the roof in Europe, but particularly in the UK. We tend to go before our friends across, you know, the waters. Do you see that consumption continuing, and do we still have a slight disconnect where there's a lot of consumers but not so many creators? So for our viewers and listeners, don't feel like, you know, the creation element is crowded this moment in time.
Yeah, great set of questions, actually. So yeah, to the point of the number of podcasts, you know, when I got into podcasts, I was relatively late. You know, 2013 was my first show, and I think then there was about 190,000 podcasts. You know, compared to 50 million blogs, however many tens of million YouTube channels, and people are still creating YouTube channels. And you know, right now we're at about 1.3 million podcasts, which is tiny, a drop in the ocean. And the point is that I think podcasting has got a very unique place in terms of content consumption, in that unless you got your headphones on for like a YouTube video, which very often you don't have that intimate connection that you have with podcasting with any other medium. You know, podcasting is very specifically set to be listened to. And that's very often done in the car. It's very often done while you're doing something more passive. And the reason that I'm mentioning that is that there's no reason that even if someone is creating content in your niche, there's no reason why you can't do something yourself, because the connection that you have with the listener is all about how you deliver it. Like you and I could talk Star Wars on 2 separate podcasts, Pascal. We could talk The Mandalorian season 2 all day long. We could say the same words.
Planning to,
we could
yes.
say the same thing. Yeah, exactly. But what would happen is that we would say things in very different contexts because our histories are different and our futures are different and our tastes are different. And that's the beauty of podcasting, is that, you know, you can connect with people on such an intimate level. And when you map that to business, like think of all the tropes and the cliches. You can reel them off. People buy from people. Know, like, trust, attention, interest, desire. You know, list all your marketing speak out on a piece of paper with all the bullet points. And there is no one of those marketing tropes that podcasting doesn't fit, because it allows you to ultimately just attract people. And that's the key thing. Now, I randomly did a YouTube video about this, like why your business needs a podcast. One of the edges that it gives you is, like, think about pitching. You know, pitching's crap. It is a pain. It is boring. It takes a lot of work. And the amount of follow-up stuff you've got to handle when you're pitching is you know, it's time consuming. What if you just had a range of content that no one else had that you could point people to? Like, who does that position as the expert when you leave a pitch and they say, oh, by the way, do you think we should build on .NET or PHP, or have you got some other technology? And if you can say, well, actually, I did a podcast episode on this, like, here's the link to it. Here's 7 minutes where I explain the merits of each one and which I think are better for different projects, versus the other person who leaves the pitch, gets asked the same question and just goes, well, not entirely sure, or tries to sell their own preference. It gives you that arsenal of stuff. And the beauty of it is that, like, you don't see businesses not setting up because there's too many businesses. Like, whoever goes, no, I'm not going to set this business up because there's too many businesses. Like, I'm not going to be a window cleaner. There aren't enough windows. I'm not going to set a software company up because there aren't enough users. It never puts anyone off. So you can't be put off by, there being too many podcasts. The only thing that it will do is just give you status, credibility. And if you do it right and you've got a strategy behind it, Google's getting into the game. Everything is becoming much more strategic. And if you have a strategy, you can be present at every part of the buying cycle as well. So, I mean, there's countless reasons, and we could talk about this forever, but I think it's vital.
Thank you very much. And, listening to you reminds me of what I've heard podcasters say to me afterwards, or even, any content creators. My work, which is to really help someone build a brand via content creation. I have a strong bias towards video, but I'm learning lots about podcasts thanks to you and Roger Duez in particular. But every single person's come back to me and said, the one thing I did not expect when I was writing for the web or doing video for the web or audio for the web is that it made me a better professional, because actually I can speak better. I can actually, because of the amount of reflection I've done in a process, I can write a better sales pitch or whatever. So I think there's also that kind of unexpected result of just being better generally at articulating a point or listening to somebody else.
Oh, hugely. Yeah. I mean, it's made me a better communicator. Like, I'm a naturally fast talker. I'm talking fast now. It's what I do. And, it's made me self-edit. You can learn how to self-edit very quickly when you listen back to yourself on a podcast. You're like, why am I talking about that for 20 minutes? I could get that done in 4. And you learn how to do that. And like you said, it makes you a better public speaker. And it also makes you better at, I think, business overall, because most of business is communication. And when you start to figure out what people respond to in terms of listening and what is resonating with my audience, you start to answer questions differently. You start, like you said, you start to pitch things differently, because you think, well, wait a second, I've done 4 episodes on this one topic and this one went well and really got a spike in downloads. Like, what was different about that? And when you apply that to real life, suddenly things start to happen. I noticed it as well. It's quite therapeutic. You develop a series of ideals, and it brings your ethics out to the front. It brings your positioning in the marketplace out to the front. It gives you, like, I'm a huge believer in, like, you can never do business if you're just a gray man. If you're the person that no one remembers because you don't stand by anything and you're always on the fence and you don't necessarily have any opinion, you don't have anything that you really care about. It's just, I want to make the money, so I'm just going to be that inoffensive that, I'll just blend in. Like, that's the worst way to do business. And I think podcasting brings to the front that personality. We see this word and this phrase, personal brand, all the time. And a lot of people don't really get what that means. A lot of people think it's, dropping an F-bomb like Gary Vee. A lot of people think it's wearing trainers. A lot of people think it's wearing a hoodie or wearing a beanie hat or trying to be quote unquote authentic. But you can't develop a personal brand until you've really figured out what you are trying to say. And the only way to try and say something is to keep saying it until you refine your story down. And it works. Like, we've spoken at events before, and, I've done, and you and I have seen this before with other speakers as well, where you'll see a speaker they'll do one talk and it starts well, but it's quite long. And then you see them a year later, and it's the same talk, but it's better because it's become refined and the story beats are better. And that's what podcasting teaches, even when you think you're not being taught anything. Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. And one thing that I think, I don't know if it's unique to podcasts, but certainly my experience feels very unique, which is the way the audience chooses you. And there's something both humbling but also exciting, which is, you're right, the way in which I've explained this, or the way in which I've chosen to express it, the way in which my values and my personal journey has has led me to, choosing those particular words, means that some people will say, not for me, and others will say, love this. And the way in which that audience will also select, it's just exciting, because that's exactly what I want, which is to only having a relationship with those who kind of get it too.
Oh yeah, lead qualification at its most ultimate. If someone hates you, brilliant, you've qualified the lead. Like, crack on, that's amazing. That we don't want to work with that person because we never get along with them. And it's something that a lot of people are scared of with that. I've got a very specific delivery style. I don't work best when everything is scripted. I like a list of bullets if I'm going to do anything. So let me give you an example. Like the talk that I gave at Retain Live for Mike and Callie. Like the brief was Mike just said, it better be good. I was like, it will be good. It will be good. And it was a story that I wanted to tell. And honestly, I'd not practiced it. And the Youpreneur talk, right, that I gave 2017 for Chris.
Run that, yeah.
I'd never run that talk in my entire life. Never done that talk. I just knew what I wanted to say. I'd never timed it. Chris was like, you've got 25 minutes on the nose. I was like, yeah, I'll be fine, I'm sure. And the reason for that, and the reason that I'm saying that, is not to sound like, oh, I don't need to practice, because everyone needs to practice, but podcasting has made me practice. I can talk, if you said talk for 30 minutes, I can pace that talk out naturally now because I've done 1,200 podcast episodes. I guarantee it. And I can make a talk just as entertaining in 15 minutes and just as informative as I can doing the same talk in 45 minutes. Now, the reason that I say that is back to your point, which is, so many people are going to love what you do, but they're not going to love what you do because of what you say. They're going to love what you do because of how you say it. And that's back to what we talked about earlier. You and I could talk about The Mandalorian all day long in two different ways, and some people would hate me and some people would hate you. That's just how it is. And what podcasting can do for you in that regard is it gives you the confidence, because when you get that one negative review, it's very easy to see that as the only thing and to think, well, I'm going to stop. I ain't going to do this anymore. Why would I do it? Like, why someone's negative? 1 star, Mark talks crap. Like, why would I do that? I don't want to open myself up to that. But then wait a second, the downloads keep coming in, and it's these hundreds and thousands of other people. They must like it. So I am going to carry on. And it gives you that confidence because the data doesn't lie. And it's fascinating to see people that start a podcast and they're a little nervous about their personal brand. They're a bit nervous about putting themselves out there. You'll see them at a conference like Podcast Movement or Youpreneur Summit. And you'll see them there for the first year and they're nervous. And then you see them a year later, and you'll have seen this with people, I've got no doubt. And they are a different person. They've hit their 6-figure turnover. They've produced 100 episodes of video or audio content, and they've refined their message, and they are just a different person. Now, nothing's happened in that time except they've become comfortable in their own skin. And that is a huge, huge thing that podcasting can do. I almost think that whether it's video, whether it's audio, whatever, like every startup should be advised to get the founder and or the marketing team in front of a mic or in front of a camera as early as possible. Because if you can do that, investors will be a piece of cake, because no one will be as harsh on you as the people on bloody Reddit. You ain't getting past those guys. So yeah, I think it is such a varied skill set, man. You learn so much from it.
Absolutely. One last question for you, I hope you don't mind. Then I've got a fun quiz to wrap up our time together. So obviously, my work is all around driving that content marketing, personal brand message. But I also, over the last few years, I've introduced this idea but also find a way to create content for fun. Because if it's all work, and it's work all the time. So my question to you is, have you found that, working on Spark of Rebellion has been helpful to recharge? It's been helpful to even come up with new ideas for the work content, if that makes any sense?
Oh, absolutely. There's the book, The One Thing, Gary Keller. It's a great book. And he goes on about willpower being a finite resource. And I'm a huge fan of that mindset, in that doing creative and fun things, whether it's, you can see all the toolbox and stuff behind me, like I'll probably be in the loft later sorting some stuff out. that's fun stuff because it's, you know, it's just doing stuff. And what that will do, just like Spark Rebellion does, it will refill that willpower tank. And I can do the admin, I can get the invoicing done, I can do the bloody accounts that I've got to do because I've already had my fill and my willpower's recharged. So that's kind of one aspect of it. The second part of it, and this might be quite unique to kind of like what we do because it's Spark Rebellion is a podcast and I work in podcasting. But I think what's fascinating from that perspective is that I get to try things with Spark Rebellion. So you'll hear, like, as an example, I did a solo episode last week on the Battle of the Mandalorian because Gaz was off, and I opened it differently. I actually opened the episode differently. I just went, hey, this is Spark Rebellion. Is the Mandalorian biting off too much? Is it taking too much on its shoulders? I'm Mark Asquith. I'm your host. We're going to dig into that. And that was a test. That was a little refinement to see whether or not putting the context at the front and then, you know, like this normal storytelling, do the bait, then get into the boring stuff and then kind of ramp it up, whether that made a difference for our show. So you kind of, like, you get inquisitive doing the fun stuff, doing the creative projects. You start to, because there are less consequences, you start to experiment with things a little bit more. And that does bleed in. You know, you might find yourself starting a YouTube channel for, I don't know, for whatever, your hobby, your Star Wars hobby. And then suddenly you're thinking, well, wait a second. All of these little tests that I'm running, like, how do I get this ranking up? I could apply that to my electrical business because the skills are transferable, and so you become a well-rounded individual. So, like, passion projects, fun projects, I think that they're so important, and it's not just the willpower, but you upskill yourself by accident, and no one tells you that. So, yeah, always be tinkering, tinkering.
Absolutely, it reminds me of the story of I met back in the early 2000s, you know, late 90s, SEO consultant, you know, the big kind of the big name back in the US, and he told his story that the reason he became good at SEO and essentially an authority is because he launched his own website about backgammon. So he was a fan of backgammon, and he created a website about the game and wanted the website to rank well. So he learned about everything he could learn about SEO before a backgammon website, and then literally became an authority and could advise others accordingly. So yeah.
Well, that's how it works, man. That's how we got into Captivate, you know, to bring that full circle. We just started going and talking at events. And what was fascinating was that we started talking about the things that we knew about, but applying it to podcasting. Like, no one was talking about marketing your podcast or building a highly converting website for your podcast. I came from agency land. I came from a digital agency. And it was virtually impossible for me not to overlay that context onto podcasting. And that's how I became known in podcasting and how I get to speak at these things, because I just needed it for myself. You know, I just needed it. I couldn't have built my podcast up without applying marketing tactics to it. So yeah, it's fascinating to see that. And so here's another thing, like, a lot of people, like the old school, you know, where it's like work is work and play is play. Like, no, it's not. That's absolute rubbish. You know, it's impossible for that now to exist, especially during COVID times and lockdown and people working at home. It is impossible that the skills that I learn when I take up photography don't transfer through to running an electrical business. You know, patience, the idea of how to spend time doing something properly, the idea of how to set something up, and only tiny little tenuous links, but they all round you out. Yeah, we should be teaching kids, you know, be inquisitive. We should be teaching them to just play with everything, just do everything.
Oh, completely, absolutely. I'm quite excited for actually the new generation of of workers, because they're going to just lap this up. You know, some of the kids who will be joining you in the next 5-10 years would probably be better at podcasting than you are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They're already better coders than, like, I'm a lapsed coder, you know, they're already better code. Like Kieran, my co-founder, is like 10 years younger than me. I'm like, you little, like, why are you that good? And it's fascinating, man, because, you know, things are accessible to people much earlier. And I think it just needs a little bit of encouragement. Said, you know what's the worst that can happen? You know, just go and try it and just give it everything you've got. And if it fails, guess what? There's like 1,000 other things you can do. Crack on. You know,
Absolutely.
there's no risk.
Wow. Well, as people can tell, not only are you an amazing host and creator of podcast, but you're a wonderful guest too. Thank you very much. Before you go, fun quiz time. So, Monsieur Mark Asquith, let me begin with this question. If you could have a Zoom call with a famous person, perhaps from the world of science, business, or entertainment, who would be on the call with you?
All right. Is it just one person or can I have several?
Yes. No, just one.
One.
Sorry.
I'd have Ricky Gervais then. It's got to be. I think it'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
But if it was going to be someone else, it'd be like Ricky Gervais plus someone that was like the exact opposite, someone like highly religious, and just let them go at it. Just let them just see. But Ricky Gervais, I think it'd be fascinating.
Excellent. Well, if you could have your own private concert, perhaps via Facebook Live, who would be the artist or band playing for you and the family?
Oh, I'd have old school Bon Jovi from about 1993. Make sure Sam Bora's there. You know, none of this modern stuff. Yeah, it's got to be old school classic Bon Jovi, or maybe Queen actually.
Fine choices. Well, since you're having the concert, let's get some food organized. So, what food would you order to go with the concert night?
Oh, that's a good question. Do you know what I'd do? I'd go to one of those takeaways, those dodgy takeaways that just do everything. You know, where you're like, how can you possibly do kebabs and pizza and also all of this other fine Chinese food and stuff? And I'd just order one of everything. Honestly, I wouldn't mess around with any fine food. I'd just go down the takeaway and say, get me one of everything and two of the kebab meat.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, interesting question for you. If you could have your own radio show, what would you talk about and who would be your co-host?
I actually think I'd just do Star Wars and host it with like you and Gaz and all the other people. Like this is what I do that already. Yeah, I'd just do the same.
Yeah, you would have just the rolling sofa, so you just change the co-host every so often. Yeah.
And wouldn't it be great? Because if you had a radio show, then you get the badass guest. You'd be like, Mark Hamill, here he comes. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, that'd be pretty sweet. I would do that.
Mark would be up for it as well. We know him.
Yeah, he'd have a bit of banter, wouldn't he? He seems like a laugh.
Would. Now, last question for you. When all this is behind us and we can move around and travel more freely, where would you like to go?
Well, outside of just the usual places we all go, like all the people that we are used to seeing, the conferences and see, like that's probably the place that I'd go with everyone from this context. But I think me and Sam would just go off to New York somewhere and just like, I miss the city. I've not been there. It's the first time in 6 years that I've not spent more than a few weeks there. So I'd just go back there and chill out, see some friends and take Sam along and just do a month or two there, I reckon. I love the place.
Thank you very much, Mark Asquith. Thank you for being at the Battle of the Apps and showing us, a bit of Captivate.fm. For our viewers and listeners who have perhaps more questions for you, where can they go on the interweb to know more about Mark and Rebel Best Media?
Just hit me up on Twitter. I can direct you then just at Mr. Asquith on Twitter, and just any questions or just say hello, and we can pick up the chat from there. So at Mr. Asquith on Twitter.
Excellent. And to you, our viewers and listeners, thank you for your support. Please leave suggestions, comments, and feedback in the usual places. Until the next one, go out there and make sure your content is better and faster. Bye for now.